Hi, my name is Sarah McCord. I'm a computational biologist at the USDA Agricultural Research Service at the Jornada Experimental Range. Today I'm going to review 10 important data quality questions that you can ask yourself to improve your data. And if you haven't watched my introduction to quality assurance and quality control video, I recommend you go watch that and then come back and meet me here and we can go through the questions. And just to review what we mean by data quality, usually we're referring to the specific processes of quality assurance and quality control. And quality assurance is an anticipatory process to prevent errors from being inserted into your data or analysis, which ultimately leads to fewer errors in your data or analysis product. In contrast, quality control is a reactive process to detect, document, and if possible, fix errors in your data or analysis. And quality control is often just a validation of the quality within your data or analysis product. And if we think about how these two processes are different, it really comes down to the questions that we ask. Quality assurance is asking what could go wrong? How could we prevent errors from being introduced? And how will we address errors that do occur? And quality control is asking what did go wrong? How can we detect errors? And can we fix those errors? If so, how? And if not, what then? And I've distilled this down to get even more specific of what are 10 important questions that cover both quality assurance and quality control that we should be asking ourselves as we collect and use data. And the first question is, what is my data ecosystem? It's important to take a minute and think about what data do you have? What will you do with those data? How will they change? And as those data transition from different formats, maybe from paper to electronic to an enterprise database, where are the opportunities for things to go wrong? And so if you know how your data will shift and transition, then you know what the potential for errors is, and similarly, you know what the potential impact of those data will be. The second question is, what is my plan? How will you manage those data? How will you collect those data? Who will be involved? Documenting all of these things has been shown to prevent errors in the long term. The third question is, who is responsible? Who is going to do what and when? And how will all of the people or teams work together? And this is especially important for large teams who may be working across scales, across the United States or across the globe. However, it's equally important in small teams where you may think that you have communicated who is responsible for what, but in fact, those implicit assumptions, one person isn't understanding what you are assuming that they can do. So it always helps to build a little bit of a model of who is going to do what and when. The fourth question is, how will training occur? Who needs to be trained? When do they need to be trained? How often do they need to retrain? Training is one of the best ways to make sure that you are following the protocol correctly and the data that you think you're getting is actually what you're getting. The fourth question is, what is the calibration plan? How are you going to ensure that the data that you collect is what you intended to collect? And there's several different ways to calibrate. One way is against a known value, like in a lab, and we often do this for soil texture values. The other way is where there isn't really a good way to get a known true value, is that you can calibrate between observers and make sure that everyone is within a tolerable range of variability. You can also calibrate between methods and make sure that both methods are producing the same answer, again, within a specified tolerable range of variability. The sixth question is, how are we actually going to collect these data? How are we going to document our observations? Are you going to use paper? If so, you might need to institute a process for manual checks and data entry and reentry. Or do you have an electronic data capture system? If so, are there automated checks in place? And what sort of system setup and maintenance do you need to do of the software and hardware that you're going to be using? Question 7 is, how will the data be stored in the long term? Will you use a personal file system, a database, or a public repository? All of those, you may have good reasons for each of them, but know that ultimately to share and use our data. And so we may not want to keep our data long-term in a personal file system, just in case those files are corrupted or somebody else needs to access them and they're unable to find them. So we strongly recommend that you put your data in preferably an enterprise database, and even more ideal into a public repository where your data can be found and be used. The 8th question is really the beginning and core of quality control. And that question is, are the data complete, correct, and consistent? Are the data complete? Do you have all of the values that you should have? Are you using the correct terms and nomenclature that is specified by the protocol? And is that consistently applied across all of your data? And data visualization is a really important tool here in helping to answer those questions. For instance, in this study, we looked at whether or not the right ecological site was being identified, and we used the naming conventions to help us identify that. We can also look for outlier checks and logical checks to make sure that do variables that we know tend to correlate actually correlate in those data sets. In areas where there isn't high correspondence, we might want to go and take a closer look at those data and see what's going on. Finally, you can also look at how data are changing over time, and are you seeing the patterns that you would expect? For instance, when we made this figure, we identified that there were some data that were supposedly collected outside of the sampling window that we had anticipated. So we went and looked at those plots, and that was a data entry error. So graphing can be really important. And as you're looking for completeness, correctness, and consistency, it can also be important to be asking the question, what are the sources of data variability? How are the data varying in space, time, across observers, between instruments? All of these are going to impact the assumptions and the use constraints of the data. So it's great to be asking yourself this question. And ultimately, after you've asked all of these questions and gotten answers to them, the next question is, how can you do better next time? How can you adaptively monitor, adaptively collect data based on what you've learned this time, and making sure that your data are always improving and your data collection processes are always improving. So there you have it. There are 10 important data quality questions to apply to your monitoring, to apply to your research data collection. And just know that what we do in data quality has impact. Our data are used for land management decisions. They're used for our research. And all of that is really exciting and will be better and empowered with higher data